All right, welcome back, and we will look at these classical theories a little more. So, beginning now with conflict theory. The view of society that conflict theorists have is that there's constant tension and struggle between groups. It is, a permanent competition where each one is trying to get more or better than the other groups. Because of that, the main ideas that it focuses on are inequality, the resources that are unequal. Those resources can be anything. Those resources can be money, they can be status, they can be reputation, what kind of job you can get, whose name is on your clothing besides your own, which label you're wearing, how much you pay for a haircut, okay? Those are different types of resources. They also look at privilege, recognizing that people who have more resources tend to have more privileges to go with it. Because of that, society is incredibly stratified as part of that inequality. Stratification, the idea that society is divided into multiple different levels or layers, and that we're each living on a different one. And because Karl Marx was the founder, of course, capitalism is the source or the root of all of this evil of inequality. All right. Now, what about people under this system? According to a conflict theorist, people are shaped by power, coercion, and authority. We are going to be, act, and do according to where we are placed within this system of inequality. So the type of power we have access to is going to shape our perception. Our perceptions and our lives are going to be shaped by whatever coercive or forceful forces there are outside of us that are helping to keep us in line. Or are we helping to keep others in line? Same idea with authority. So for the conflict theorist, social order is maintained because those in power are using force and coercion to help maintain the unequal status quo. They're taking advantage of all of their privilege, and they are using it to make sure that they stay in the privileged positions. They make the rules in a way that benefits them and makes things more difficult for the rest of us. Their view of social change is that social change happens often, and it's often incredibly disruptive because Marx was waiting for the revolution. Okay, so these kinds of mini revolutions happen all the time, and that these revolutions can have positive consequences, where the functionalists look at it and it's like, oh no, it interferes with our order and our stability and keeping everything predictable and comfortable. The conflict theorists look at it and say, toss the whole thing on its ear and let's see what new thing we can create. Okay? Feminist theory is a sub-theory under conflict. It's a type of conflict theory, and we're going to go a little further into that one with the next cheat sheet. But basically, it's using this conflict idea that about tension and struggle between groups, inequality in the resources, and different levels of privilege and stratification and power and coercion and authority. And it's saying that all of this exists between males and females. And that society uses these things to keep men in the superior position and women in the subordinate or inferior position. That the system is using these structures to perpetuate male privilege. Okay, we'll come back to that one. Next over, we have the Interactionist theory, or Symbolic Interactionism. This one says, its view of society is that society influences and affects our everyday social interactions, but we do the same thing to society. We also influence society and its values and behaviors through the little interactions that we have every day. So the things that are important to a symbolic interactionist when they're trying to understand how that process of the individual influencing the society and the society influencing the individual. How does this work? They're looking at symbols. What kinds of symbols are we using? How are we exchanging them? What do they mean to different people? Excuse me. So symbols can be things like, once again, the clothes you're wearing. That helps to communicate to other people a sense of where you fit in the stratification system. True. But for others, it communicates what your values are. If you see me in my, in the clothes that I would typically wear to go do, outdoor kind of things or take care of my horse, when the jeans start, they don't get holes in the normal sense. I wear patches, spots on them thin until eventually the threads just break. And, one leg wants to work on just kind of ripping itself off. And so anyway, when I see that happening, I look down, it's like, well, you know what? I can get some extra mileage out of that. And, the tennis shoes that I wear most of the time, because they're convenient, they have holes in them. Okay? If you saw me dressed like this, you would probably think that I was, let's see, you could put me in the category of homeless, because the symbolism here is suggesting to other people that I must not have the resources to own clothing and shoes that are in good repair. Never mind the fact that I'm cutting apart a worse pair of jeans that still had a good piece on it, so I could use it to patch the jeans that I'm going to keep in action for a little longer. All right? What that's really symbolizing for me is that I am being frugal rather than wasteful. Who cares what my jeans look like when I'm working outside? My horse doesn't care. All he wants to know is if I brought food. So, when I go to the stable, I am the worst dressed person there. But my horse has everything he needs in order to be healthy, okay? So, as far as my clothing, it will mean different things to each person who perceives it. Language is the single most important symbol that we have, because that symbol is the one that allows us to communicate at all, but particularly complex information, as well as abstract information. Communication is the thing that allows us to share an idea, to turn an idea into an actuality. So it looks at what kind of symbols are we using and how are we using them, and what do these different symbols mean to different smaller groups within a society. They're also looking at the social norms that we create through our interactions. Those norms being how we behave, what our expectations are when we encounter each other. Back in the olden days, I guess we can call it BC now, before COVID, a social norm was to introduce ourselves to each other with a handshake. Well, that social norm got booted out the window because it took on a new symbolic meaning when we were concerned about transmitting viruses. Okay. So we came up with a new norm that for a short time they were doing, even politicians on stage, they were doing the fist bump. And then the fist bump went away because we shouldn't even have fists tapping each other in the time of, COVID. And so we'll do an elbow bump instead. And then eventually the elbow bump went away because that put us within 6 feet of each other, and we couldn't be within 6 feet of each other. So, we might give each other a little subtle wave or a nod or something like that. Smiles didn't work anymore because we were wearing masks. So, in any case, it looks at how and what the norms are and how and why they change. It's also looking among those symbols and norms at nonverbal communication, how people use inflection, gestures, physical distancing or spacing versus not. For a short time, I was tutoring a high school exchange student. Actually, her family, it was an international student, and her family had come to the U.S. The family was from China. The girl was in high school. And one day, I'm US born and raised, so the idea of staying out of people's personal space is just subconscious for me. And if I violate that personal space or my perception of it, I apologize. Well, this girl and I were sitting side by side at the dining room table looking at something, and I leaned in, and this is a girl I don't know well, and I realized that I was like really in her personal space. And so I pulled back, kind of shifted over in the seat. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to intrude in your space. And she looked at me and she says, oh, that's an American thing. She says, in China, everybody's really close together. There's a lot of people. There's not a lot of room. So we don't see it that way. Aha. Nonverbal communication. This nonverbal communication about, what is acceptable personal space and what does it mean when you step into somebody's or move into somebody's. Here in the US, what we'll find is that they'll pull back a lot, which is that nonverbal communication that, whoa, my space, your space, get out of mine. We're looking at how people, the interactionists are looking at how people interact face-to-face versus in the online world. And they're also, interesting theory here, the dramaturgical approach. This one comes to us from Irving Goffman. I think I might have told you about it already, the idea that we're all actors on a stage trying to put on a good show. As far as the individual, interactionists see us as individuals, as people who manipulate those symbols, and we create our social worlds through our interaction. We are actively either creating, maintaining, or changing society every time we interact. It's not something that's just handed to us, a finished society. We are co-creators through our lives and actions. According to them, we maintain social order by sharing an understanding of what we as a society value and what our shared expectations are for social norms. As far as social change, they see that as reflected in the social positions that we occupy and the types of communication that we have. Now, gender theory falls under interactionism. I'm going to skip over the Thomas theorem. Gender theory falls under interactionism. It's the study of what is considered or understood as masculine or feminine or queer behavior or self-presentation in any given context, community, society, or field of study. Gender theory basically is looking at the symbols that we've been conditioned to use to convey our gender to other people, as well as to reinforce for ourselves what our gender identity is. So this is going to be in the clothing that you wear, in the mannerisms that you use, in the way that you speak, in the way that you greet other people, in how close you stand. Men tend to hold more physical space between each other than women often do. Even if we're looking at people who are close friends, the men will still hold more physical space in general than the women do. So, what are appropriate hairstyles? Do you wear nail polish? Do you wear makeup? Gender theory is looking at how society tells us what is appropriate for each of us based on our biological sex. Okay? That's what it's really being based on. So I'm going to stop here, and instead of running through queer theory on this page, I'm going to pick it up on the page with the modern theories. So I will see you shortly.